When Officer Blake pulls over a black man in a luxury car for speeding, he expects compliance or conflict. What he gets instead is a lesson he never saw coming, because the man he stopped isn't just any driver, and the badge in Blake's pocket isn't the only one that carries weight today. What unfolds on the side of that highway is a quiet dismantling of bias, power, and the assumptions that ride shotgun in America. The sun hung low, casting long shadows over the two-lane highway, the kind of golden hour that made even cracked asphalt look cinematic. Officer Blake sat in his cruiser, thumb tapping the edge of the steering wheel. Then, flash of movement, a black BMW, tinted windows, gliding a few ticks over the posted limit. Not reckless, just smooth, confident. He flicked on the lights, shifted into gear, and pulled out. The car slowed almost immediately, blinkers flashing, tires easing onto the shoulder, like it knew the script. Blake stepped out, adjusting his belt. He approached with measured steps, one hand near the holster, not out of necessity, but habit. The window rolled down. Inside sat a black man, mid-40s, composed, crisp blazer, no visible stress, both hands resting calmly on the wheel. His gaze was steady, but unreadable. Blake's tone, clipped, license and registration. Of course, the man replied, voice smooth, almost disarming. He moved deliberately, retrieving his wallet, then the papers from the glove box. No sudden movements, like he'd practiced this before. Like he knew. Blake took the documents, barely glancing at them. Know why I stopped you? Speeding. The man didn't flinch, didn't argue, just left the word hanging in the air between them. Blake didn't answer right away. His eyes scanned the interior. Leather seats, neat console, no signs of anything out of place. That, somehow, made him more suspicious. He stepped back toward his cruiser, running the plates. Clean, registered to the driver. No warrants, no alerts. Still, something in Blake tightened. He wasn't sure why, or maybe he was, and didn't want to admit it. The badge gave him authority, but today it felt more like armor, thin and brittle. He stepped back to the window. This your car? Yes. You heading somewhere important? Always. A pause, the kind that crackles with everything that's not being said. Blake shifted his weight. The man didn't break eye contact, didn't blink, just sat there, calm in a storm that hadn't fully broken yet. Blake's hand drifted near his radio. Step out of the vehicle, he said flatly. There was no protest, no raised voice, just the quiet click of a seatbelt, and the sound of shoes on gravel. The man stood tall, blazer adjusting itself as he rose. Blake studied him, looking for something, anything, to justify the unease coiling in his chest. But all he saw was a man who wasn't afraid, and somehow, that unnerved him more than anything else. Blake moved slowly around the car, one step at a time, scanning as if the gloss of the paint might peel back and reveal a reason. The windows were tinted, but legal, the rims, polished, factory standard. No decals, no clutter, just a car that didn't fit the profile he carried in the back of his mind. Or maybe it did, just not the kind he admitted out loud. He paused at the rear license plate, read it again. No flags, no out-of-state tags. No rust, no nonsense, just clean. He leaned down near the passenger side, hands on his hips. Is this your vehicle? He asked, voice edged with something unspoken.
Yes.
The driver replied, tone calm, clipped, rehearsed, like he'd been asked that before. Too many times. Blake straightened. Where you headed? The man met his gaze evenly. Someplace I need to be. Blake raised an eyebrow. That an answer? It's the truth. There was no sarcasm, no anger, just the kind of confidence that didn't need to defend itself. That, somehow, irritated Blake more than defiance would have. He turned sharply, and walked back to the cruiser, the weight of his radio suddenly noticeable on his shoulder. Inside the patrol car, he ran the plates again, double-checked the spelling, entered the driver's license number, hoping for a hiccup. A missed renewal, a technicality, anything, nothing. The screen blinked back at him. Valid license, no warrants, no tickets, no record. Blake stared at the monitor, like it had let him down. He leaned back, exhaling hard. Something about this didn't sit right. Not because the driver had done anything wrong, but because he'd done everything right. That car, that composure, that sharp crease in his jacket. Blake had seen arrogance before. This wasn't that. It was control, self-possession, presence, and it gnawed at him. He glanced in the rearview mirror. The man was still standing by the car, relaxed, hands visible, not moving, no phone, no pacing, just waiting. Blake opened the cruiser door with more force than necessary, and strode back. The gravel crunched beneath his boots, each step louder than it needed to be. He stopped at the front of the car again, lips pressed into a tight line. "What do you do for a living?" he asked. The man tilted his head slightly. "Is that relevant to a speeding ticket?" Blake didn't answer. Silence stretched between them. Finally, the man spoke again, measured. "Would you ask the same question if I were driving a different car?" Blake swallowed hard, but didn't respond. Because the truth was, he didn't like the answer forming in his own head. Blake stood firm, legs squared, voice low and authoritative. "Step out of the vehicle." The man didn't flinch. No sigh, no argument, just a slow, deliberate nod. He opened the door and stepped onto the shoulder, gravel crunching under polished leather shoes. He moved like a man who'd done this before, only from the other side. "Hands where I can see them," Blake added, a little sharper than he meant to. The man complied. No tension, just calm, unnerving calm. Then, with a grace that felt almost ceremonial, he reached into the inside pocket of his blazer. No sudden movements, just slow enough to be undeniable. He pulled out a black leather wallet, flipped it open, and held it toward Blake. Not a driver's license. A badge. Blake blinked. The emblem was familiar. Too familiar. Gold crest. Navy SEAL. Internal Affairs. Deputy Chief Daniel Reeves, the man said, voice steady. "Badge number 24781. Office of Internal Oversight." Blake didn't move, didn't breathe. Reeves let the badge rest in the space between them, its reflection catching the dying light. "You just pulled over a senior officer in your own department." Silence. Blake's throat tightened. The distant hum of traffic faded to a murmur. Somewhere, a bird called from the trees, but the loudest thing was the rush in his ears, his own heartbeat thudding in disbelief. Blake started. "Yes," Reeves said. "Not a boast, just a fact. And no, I didn't lead with it, because I wanted to see how this played out without the weight of a title." Blake looked at the badge again, then back at Reeves. His own authority now felt like a cheap prop, paper thin. He opened his mouth, but the words tangled. "I ran your plates," Blake managed, trying to find footing. "And they came back clean," Reeves said. "Yet you kept digging." Blake's mouth was dry. "It's standard procedure." Reeves tilted his head. "Is it?" The question landed heavier than anything else Blake had said all day. He looked down at his boots, then up again, searching for something: defense, justification, a reset. None came. "I expected better," Reeves said quietly. "Not because of who I am, but because of who you are supposed to be." Blake's badge suddenly felt like it weighed 100 pounds. Reeves tucked his own away, as if to signal the moment had passed, but the message hadn't. He turned toward his car, pausing with a glance over his shoulder. "Be honest, Officer Blake," he said. "If I were wearing jeans and a hoodie, instead of a blazer and a badge, would we still be standing here?" And with that, he stepped back inside the BMW, door closing with a soft finality. Blake didn't answer, because the question wasn't really for Reeves, it was for himself. Blake stood frozen, the heat from the pavement rising up through his boots, like it might burn away the moment. His mouth opened, then closed. The script he normally followed, the clipped warnings, the thin apologies, suddenly felt inadequate. I didn't realize," he stammered. I thought." Reeves didn't move. He just watched. Blake cleared his throat. It was just a routine stop. Speed check. Nothing personal. Reeves raised an eyebrow. "Speed check." The words landed soft, but the weight behind them was steel. "You didn't even clock me." Blake said nothing, because they both knew it was true. "I was doing 57 in a 55. Reeves said calmly. "That's within buffer range." "You know it." "I know it." Blake tried again. "Maybe I was wrong. Maybe I overreacted. Misread the situation." Reeves didn't let the silence grow comfortable. "No, You read it exactly the way you've been taught to read it. You saw a black man, in a suit behind the wheel of a car you didn't expect, and something in your brain lit up and told you, this doesn't add up. Blake swallowed hard. That's not what You didn't stop me, because of what I did. Reeves interrupted, voice still even. You stopped me, because I didn't fit your picture of who should belong here, on this road, in this car, in that blazer. The words weren't loud, but they hit like a gavel. Blake shifted his weight, suddenly aware of how heavy the silence felt. The sun was lower now, casting long shadows across the hood of the BMW. The wind moved through the trees behind them, but the air between them was still. Reeves stepped closer, not in threat, but in truth. You wear a badge, same as me, but the question is, what are you protecting? The law, or your comfort? Blake looked down. He didn't have an answer. I'm not here to ruin your day, officer, Reeves said. I'm here to remind you that your job starts before the stop, with the story you tell yourself, the moment you see someone like me. Blake's face flushed, not from anger, but realization, the uncomfortable kind. You think I carry this badge to feel powerful? Reeves continued. I carry it because I've had to work twice as hard to earn half the doubt. And today, you proved why. He turned, walking back toward his door again. Blake didn't stop him this time. He couldn't, because for the first time in his career, the man with the clipboard wasn't the one doing the inspection. He was the one being inspected. And this time, the mirror didn't blink. Blake stood by the car, the heat of the moment, still pressing against his skin. No sirens now. No barked commands, just the hum of passing traffic, and the quiet aftermath of truth. His posture had changed, no longer squared in authority, but slouched in something closer to humility. Deputy Chief Reeves didn't move with dominance. He didn't puff his chest, or twist the moment into a lecture. He simply stood still, steady, eyes fixed on Blake with the weight of a man who had lived through too many versions of this scene. What you do in that uniform matters, Reeves said, his voice low but unshakable. People watch. People remember. One mistake, one assumption can cost someone more than a ticket. Blake nodded, barely. He wanted to speak, to defend himself, but the words refused to form, because deep down, he knew this wasn't about paperwork or protocols. It was about perception. But what you assume before you act, Reeves continued. That's where the real damage begins. Blake shifted, hands on his belt, eyes darting toward the trees, as if the branches might offer him a way out. They didn't. I'm not here to write you up, Reeves said. I'm not even here to embarrass you. I'm here because someone needs to tell you the truth, before the wrong stop becomes a deadly one. Blake's mouth opened, but Reeves gently held up a hand. You want to be better? He asked. Then start here. With this. With what just happened. Blake met his eyes, finally. The burn of embarrassment, giving way to something deeper, guilt, and maybe, just maybe, growth. Reeves reached into his pocket again, and pulled out a business card. Simple, clean. He extended it without drama. I'm leading a session next Thursday, he said. Bias in policing. We talk, we listen, we unlearn. Blake took the card, like it might burn, but didn't pull his hand away. He stared at it, white print on a dark blue background. No threats, just an address, a time, a door that hadn't closed. It's not mandatory, Reeves added, but it's necessary. Blake held the card tighter than he needed to. His badge still sat on his chest, but for the first time, in a long while, he felt the weight of it differently. Reeves turned to go, opened the car door, then paused. I've seen this job break good men, he said, over his shoulder. Not because they were bad, but because they were blind. Then he got in, shut the door, and merged back into traffic like nothing had happened. But something had, and for Blake, it wasn't the stop that stayed with him. It was the invitation. The fluorescent lights in the community center buzzed faintly overhead, casting a soft hum across the room. Folding chairs were set in a loose circle. No podium, no lectern, just space. Space to be uncomfortable, space to listen. Blake stepped in quietly, late, but not unnoticed. Civilian clothes, badge tucked away. He took a seat near the back, eyes scanning the room without really seeing. Half a dozen officers scattered around, a few community members,
a social worker, a teacher, and at the front, Deputy Chief Reeves, notebook in hand, not a uniform in sight. He didn't point Blake out, didn't call attention to his presence. He just started. They talked about perception, about history, about how fear, once embedded, becomes instinct. No shouting, no blame, just stories, some raw, some reluctant, all real. Blake said nothing for the first hour. He sat with his arms folded, jaw tight, but his eyes moved. He watched the retired black teacher speak about the day her grandson was stopped walking home from school, asked to empty his backpack for no reason. He listened to a fellow cop admit how hard it was to challenge bias inside the department without being labeled soft, and something in Blake shifted, not loudly, but like a slow breath, finally exhaled. After the session ended, people filtered out, some in silence, some in quiet conversation. Blake stayed seated. Reeves didn't approach. He waited. Finally, Blake stood, walked over, cleared his throat. "I didn't know," he said, voice low. "I thought I did, but I didn't." Reeves didn't nod, didn't offer comfort. He just looked at him. "That's the beginning." Blake hesitated. "It felt easier, when I believed I was being fair." "It always does," Reeves replied. "But fairness without awareness is just a coin toss." Blake didn't argue. He stayed another 15 minutes, asked about resources, training, books, bias indicators. He didn't pretend to be woke. He didn't fake outrage. He just asked. The next week, he came back. This time, earlier. He sat closer. He spoke once, just a few sentences, admitting how quickly he'd sized someone up, based on nothing but skin, a car, and a gut feeling he no longer trusted. The room didn't clap, but it listened. By the third week, another officer came with him, then two more. One said he saw the change, another said he'd made a stop recently, and paused before assuming. Blake never made a speech, never posted a thread. He didn't need to, because real change doesn't always come in riots or headlines. Sometimes, it starts in the back row, with a man who showed up, stayed late, and finally let the mirror stay up long enough to see himself fully. The academy room smelled faintly of fresh paint and old sweat, walls lined with department values, the words integrity and service stamped above the whiteboard in block letters. 20 fresh uniforms sat in folding chairs, backs straight, eyes sharp. Most still clung to the thrill of the badge, the idea of honor, the adrenaline of being the good guy. Officer Blake stood at the front, hands behind his back, a different kind of badge on display, now one of humility. He took a breath, not the kind you take before commanding a room, the kind you take when you know what you're about to say will cost you. "A few months ago," he began, voice measured, "I pulled over a black man in a BMW. He wasn't speeding, not really. But I told myself he was. No one moved. I asked all the wrong questions, not the ones on the protocol sheet, the ones people don't say out loud. Like, why is someone like him driving something like that?" He let the silence settle. "I didn't know he was Deputy Chief of Internal Affairs. Didn't know his name. Didn't ask. I just saw a threat, where there wasn't one." A few recruits shifted in their seats. One took a note. Another avoided his eyes. "I could have written it off as a mistake," Blake continued. "Could have shrugged it off. But that man, Deputy Chief Reeves, didn't shout, didn't threaten. He handed me a card." He reached into his pocket, pulled out the same one, worn now, bent edges, still in his wallet. "He invited me to a session, bias training. I went, I listened, I unlearned." He looked up, steady now. "I'm not here to say I'm reformed. I'm saying I'm responsible. There's a difference." In the back of the room, Deputy Chief Reeves leaned against the wall, arms crossed. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. Blake pointed to the card. "He could have buried me, made an example. Instead he made a door, and I walked through it." The recruits didn't applaud. That wasn't the point. One raised her hand. "Would you have treated him differently if you knew his title?" Blake didn't hesitate. "That's the problem. I probably would have. And that's exactly why I needed to change." He stepped back, giving the room its space to breathe again. Reeves nodded once, quiet approval written in the corners of his expression. Because justice isn't always sirens or subpoenas. Sometimes it's a folded card, a mirror held up, and the choice to step into a better version of yourself. Not because someone made you, but because someone gave you the chance.